Today's program is a very special one, and I'll say it's special for me, and I know it will be for all of you because Cindy Mundahl is a fascinating and deep thinking person. I first met Cindy when we took a year-long writing course together. We've been meeting, we met throughout that year, and then we continued to meet monthly, and we've done that ever since. So we're talking about 3+ years now. And there are three of us who remain in this group. And during that period of time, we've written ourselves into self-understandings and into deep friendship. Also, during this time, Cindy has made discoveries about her own asexual and aromantic identity that have led her to a new sense of wholeness. And it's that sense of wholeness that leads her to want to share with us this morning and in other settings. Today, she will share that journey with us, and she will also be reflecting on issues about cultural norms, sexuality, romance, and couplehood. Cindy is a mom with a college daughter, and she is also a longtime librarian. She has most recently reshaped herself into a spiritual director. She's long been a writer, activist, and truth seeker. Cindy has presented in many settings at this point in her life, including the International Out and Equal Workplace Summit, and also in the LGBTQIA plus Fortune 500 Leadership Series. And these are major series of lectures and presentations of various kinds on topics that concern everyone. And the topics she focuses on are creating supportive communities for asexual people and aromantics. She's also led peer support groups for the transgender and non-binary communities. She writes on the topics of self-transformation, spiritual wholeness, and reshaping relationships. Her memoir, Reclamation, An Asexual, Aromantic, Gender Expansive Journey to Wholeness, is in press and will be published this spring. Cindy currently offers spiritual direction and group spiritual education at through an organization and a website called Arising from Within. Most of all, Cindy is just a deep thinking, deep feeling, loving human being. And we are so lucky to have you with us today, Cindy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Elizabeth. It's really wonderful for me to be here and to share my story and my experience, and hopefully encourage some thought-provoking conversation today around asexuality and aromanticism and what shape it takes in our world. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started here. So my topic today is asexuality and aromanticism, an exploration of the personal and collective costs of compulsory sexuality and amatonormativity. And I know that's a mouthful, and some of these terms might be new to people. So don't worry, I'm going to ground us in some definitions before we jump in so that we are all operating from the same base of knowledge here. Before we do that, though, just to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today, I am going to share those definitions, share some facts about asexuality and aromanticism, and then I'm going to share my personal story of how I came to discover later in life that I was asexual and aromantic. I want to share some of the gifts of being asexual and aromantic, and then I want us hopefully to get into a good discussion about compulsory sexuality and culture. And I'm going to share some reflection questions that I invite you all to engage with. And then I'll also talk about how amatonormativity shows up in our culture, and again, offer some reflection questions. So let's start with some definitions. So when I say I'm asexual or another person does, that essentially means we are people who experience little or no sexual attraction. An asexual is, every asexual experiences asexuality differently, just like every heteronormative person experiences their orientation differently. So you may hear us referred to as ACEs. That's just an abbreviation for asexual. So asexuality is a sexual orientation characterized by little or no sexual attraction to other people. And as I mentioned, it exists on a spectrum just like other sexual orientations do. And an allosexual is a person who experiences sexual attraction to other people. So a lot of people don't know there is actually a term for all of you who experience sexual attraction. And in the ACE community, we call you allos. An aromantic, or an aro for short, is a person who experiences little or no romantic attraction. And aromanticism is a romantic orientation characterized by little or no romantic attraction to others. And just like other romantic orientations, it exists on a spectrum as well. Some aromantics enter into romantic type or queer platonic type relationships, what we'll get into a little bit more later on, that look a little bit different than romantic relationships. And then an alloromantic is the term for folks who experience romantic attraction. And compulsory sexuality, which we'll talk about in length later, is the belief and the social pressure that everyone should have sexual desires and be engaged in sexual activity. And amatonormativity, that's actually a kind of a newer term coined by Elizabeth Brake. And she uses the definition of, it's the assumption that everyone is better off in an exclusive, romantic, long-term coupled relationship, and that everyone is seeking such a relationship. So I want to share a few facts about asexuality, and I invite you to ask questions if you have any while I share this information. Asexuality is not a choice, just like a lot of our sexual orientations are not choices. It also is not low libido or celibacy. It's an actual sexual orientation. It's often called the invisible orientation because you can be out in the world and never know if someone is asexual. There are no telltale signs, and it's just really difficult to know if someone is asexual unless they actually tell you and come out to you. So current estimates state that about 1% of the global population is asexual. However, among younger generations, the 18 to 34-year-olds, that rate is as high as 4 to 5%, and it's somewhat increasing. So you can see as asexuality gains more prominence and visibility, and younger people are more, I think, open to exploring different identities, that we're seeing that rate increase. So an interesting fact, not all asexuals are aromantic, and not all aromantics are asexual. There's a few of us that about 30% of asexuals are also aromantic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit as well. So as a community, we asexuals had a really hard time finding community because, for example, there are no asexual bars to go hang out at. And since we're small in number, it was really hard for us not only to find our identity, but to meet others like us. In fact, I was 51 years old the first time I met another asexual person. And I'll share more about that in my story coming up soon. So, with the advent of the internet, that really helped us find not only our sexual orientation, but community as well. So, in 2001, so not even that long ago, David J. founded the Asexuality, Visibility, and Education Network, or AVEN for short, and it's now the largest online asexual community in the world. So it gives us a forum to share experiences, and for those who are questioning whether or not they're asexual, they have a supportive community there to ask questions and explore their identity with. Also, BIPOC asexuals face greater stigma due to racial stereotypes. For example, Black asexuals, Black people in our culture in the United States, at least, are often thought of as being over-sexualized. So you can imagine how a Black asexual might face greater stigma because of their racial background. And now a few facts about aromanticism. Current estimates say that there are about 1 to 4% of people globally are aromantic. And again, it exists on a spectrum. As I mentioned earlier, 30% of asexuals are also aromantic. So there are asexuals who are fine with having sexual relationships. There are, for reasons perhaps of wanting a partner or perhaps to have children. There are also aromantics who enter into platonic relationships that are long-term, lifelong relationships, but don't center around romance. So there's a lot of variance in how people experience their asexuality and aromanticism. Everything from sex repulsed asexuals to sex affirming asexuals. So it's important to know that we are not a monolith. We all experience our asexuality and aromanticism differently. And very interesting about aromanticism is that it informs the split attraction model. And I'm not going to go into this in great depth, but if you're at all interested, I highly recommend you look into the split attraction model. It's quite fascinating. But essentially, aromanticism and asexuality really help to break apart that romantic attraction and sexual attraction are not one and the same. A person can have sexual attraction, but not romantic attraction, and vice versa. So because, allosexuals and alloromantics are considered the norm, we conflate that everyone who is, basically everyone is feeling sexual and romantic because they're one and the same, when in actuality they're not. They're separate attractions. And aromantics challenge societal expectations of relationships. There are lots of three-parent families amongst aromantics where three aromantics might come together to form a family, each having an equal partnership in the family for the purpose of having children and raising a family. There are also queer platonic relationships where two or more aromantics may come together and live platonically, but decide that they want to share their lives together and do so freely. So with that as kind of our basis, I wanted to share my story because my story is a little unique. As I mentioned, I didn't realize I was asexual or aromantic until later in life. And in fact, I never even heard those words until I was in my late 40s. So I just wanted to share the perspective of what it was like to not know core parts of my identity for decades of my life and how that affected me. So I was born and raised in Minnesota, in the Midwest. I've lived here most of my life. And I grew up in a family, my mom and dad and my brother in the suburbs of Minneapolis. I didn't know any queer people. I didn't really have visibility to what queerness was. It was just something that wasn't even on my radar growing up. I didn't know. Um, I remember the show Three's Company, if you remember that, if you're old enough to remember that. And I think that was the first time I even heard the word homosexual. So that was really my only visibility to queerness at all growing up. So my little 7-year-old self started to become very confused because I realized one day at a family picnic, as I watched my aunts and uncles and parents and cousins, I just had this very deep intuitive knowing that they experienced life very differently than I did, and that I was very different from them. And they lived with an ease that I didn't have. And I knew down deep in my bones that this ease that they lived with that I didn't have would somehow make my life much harder than theirs, again, in some unknown way. So I started to really internalize this difference that I didn't have a name for. And I didn't tell anyone that I felt this difference because I just had no concept of what it could be or even how to articulate it. So in my teenage years, as my friends started to date and get into intimate relationships, I was just confounded, and the distance I felt between myself and others just grew. I was very much an athlete. I loved sports. I always had as a kid. And so I threw myself into sports. And while my friends were going on, life being allosexual and aromantic, again, I still had no language for the difference that I felt. I just felt that my friends seemed to have some type of instruction manual from the get-go at birth that I never got, because they started to date and have these relationships with ease, and I just couldn't understand it at all. And every time I tried to do it, it was the most foreign and awkward thing that I could possibly attempt. So I would try, I would not try for a while, and I just felt this pressure to be like other kids, as most teenagers do. So it was a very difficult time for me. Oops. And so as I entered adulthood and my friends started to get married and have children, that distance between me and everyone else really grew deep, and I started vacillating between depression and anxiety, which I went through for decades of my life. Again, still not understanding what was different about me. And I started to travel the world, hoping that I could find this thing that was missing for me, what my difference was. I would travel to far off places thinking maybe I needed a new religion, maybe I needed a new career. And every time I would come home, I would just be so bereft because I never found what it was that was missing for me. So my anxiety and depression just kept deepening. Then on one of my trips, I had a deep intuitive knowing it was time for me to have a child. So I adopted my daughter, Catherine, um, and I did that solo on my own. I raised her by myself. As Mary Elizabeth mentioned, she's now college age. It never occurred to me to have a partner when raising a child. I did certainly have a lot of support from my family and friends as well. It also never occurred to me to give birth to a child. I never had any desire to give birth. So I always knew that if I was going to have a child one day, it would be through adoption. So that was um, always obvious to me. And of course, my depression and anxiety didn't go away just because I had a child. I still didn't understand what was missing for me, still didn't have language for these parts of me that felt that made me so disconnected. So my anxiety and depression grew as I became a parent, and I had the wherewithal to know that being a parent consumed so much of my time, especially as a single solo parent, that I had no time for dating, which felt like a huge relief for me. I didn't have to now try to go out and date and find a partner because I was so immersed in raising a child, and that was an acceptable reason to not date. So um, that was something that I was very aware of. And then when my daughter Catherine was about 10 years old, my anxiety got so bad that my body essentially shut down. I couldn't eat, I couldn't work. This lasted for several months, and it was a very trying time for me. And I realized it was time for me to ask for help. So I did that and started to explore myself much more deeply than I ever had before. And I started to do that through writing about my life. And I started to write down my life story for Catherine because I wanted her to know who I was and about my life. And as I was writing my life story, I looked back on my life and I was convinced that I was a lesbian. I was sure, looking back on my life experiences as I had written them, that that's what um, my life was showing me at this point in time. So, as many asexuals do, we try on a lot of different identities and orientations because for us, it's often a process of elimination to discover that we're asexual and or aromantic. And that's really how I started to focus on who I was as a sexual person. So this was during COVID, so it was difficult to date. I thought I had tried to date men, and I could never connect. And so I thought, if I try to date women, I think that connection will happen. Well, sure enough, I tried to date women, and the same thing happened. I just couldn't connect. Everyone I experienced as a friend, and that's as much connection as I could muster. So at this point in time, I decided to go to a conference. I again thought I was queer in some way. I didn't quite understand in what way. So I went to the Out and Equal conference through my workplace, and they had some seminars on asexuality. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I think I'll attend one of those. And in one of those sessions, there was a panel of asexual folks, and they were sharing their experience of what it was like for them to be asexual. And I just felt a warm rush pass through my body as they spoke, because I recognized myself in their stories. And again, I was about 50 years old at this time. So just discovering for the very first time that I was asexual. And you might think that that was a happy experience for me. It was not. I felt deep, deep shame for being asexual. And I understood why it was something I couldn't accept about myself. I knew that society was telling me that I had to be have sexual attraction and romantic attraction to fit in. That was obvious to me already. And I also knew that I knew myself well enough to know that even though I had this deep shame about being asexual, that one day I would be in the position of being on a panel sharing my story. But I knew I had to work through my shame and grief. I also had deep, deep grief over not knowing these core parts of myself for decades. So I had a lot of internal work to do, which I did through therapy, through a lot of writing, just through a lot of, emoting, not pushing down how I really felt about my identity, and really learning from other asexuals what the gifts were. And I started to internalize that. And I could begin to see in my own life the gifts of who I truly was. So I accepted myself as asexual. And a year after being a witness to those folks on the panel, I myself was on the panel the following year. So it took me a year to work through my shame and grief and share my story publicly for the first time for others, in hopes that I might return the gift that was given me and help others discover their sexuality. Now, it took me longer to figure out I was aromantic. For me, that was more difficult to discern. Again, we're given so many messages: romantic comedies, love songs, romance novels. It just feels like a total clubbing you over the head that romance and romantic relationships are the way and the only way for us to be. So when I started to think about should I have a partner, I realized, for me, the hallmark of being a romantic is I've never been in love. I don't know what that is. A lot of aromantics don't have any lived experience of that. I have no concept of what falling in love is like. It's very foreign to me. And the fact that we often place romantic love on this hierarchy of all types of love is kind of astonishing to me, and always has been. But now I had language for that. So I realized that, yes, I was aromantic. This is the asexual and aromantic flags I'm showing here. So that was a deep, deep relief for me, that I didn't have to keep trying to date and pretend that I wanted a partner. I was actually quite fine with not having a partner now that I understood that who I truly was. So, interestingly, all of this self-exploration really kind of sent me into a second puberty again in my early 50s. So, kind of humorously, my daughter and I were kind of going through puberty at the same time. So I bought all the pride stickers, all the flags, all the hats, all the shirts. I just really had to ground myself in my identity. I went to pride marches and marched in parades, and I did everything I could to kind of internalize and realize and celebrate who I was. So it was a very interesting and fun time for me. And now I celebrate who I am through giving talks like this and helping others who are questioning whether they're asexual and aromantic. And I just think it's important for those of us who have minority identities to share our stories. And so I share this. This is a book list I found recently at my local library of asexual and aromantic books. And I was elated when I came across this, knowing that, wow, now people who may be questioning or wondering about whether or not they're asexual or aromantic have actual resources in their libraries for them to access. So this was a very exciting and proud day for me. However, it also brought with it another wave of grief of knowing that I never had this growing up. I had no visibility, no understanding of who I was, no access to this type of media to explain to me who I might be and what my difference was. So I share my story with you just to invite you into contemplating what the costs are when we don't allow people to explore their identities, or when we keep certain identities under wraps and don't have visibility or representation available for folks. So I do want to share the gifts of being asexual and aromantic, of which there are many. These are just a few. As I mentioned, I don't adhere to a hierarchy of love. I have so much love in my life. I don't put any specific love on a pedestal. In fact, for me, it almost feels like I'm an alien who's been dropped on this planet, and people arbitrarily chose romantic love as the most fulfilling type of love, and it's completely foreign to me. I don't understand it. So I don't live with a hierarchy of love. I just love. Um, we have the ability to define intimacy for ourselves. A lot of people believe that being asexual means you don't have intimacy or you're incapable of it. And I would say nothing is further from the truth. I have deep intimacy in my life in many different ways, with nature, with books, with writing, with other people. It just doesn't take on the sexual or romantic context. We can create relationships according to our own desires and needs. We don't live according to society's rules, which is actually pretty fun. And we get to define our relationships for ourselves. We have a lot of time for focus on personal growth because we're not focused on a partner necessarily, or trying to keep a marriage, thriving. And amongst us asexuals and aromantics, we joke that we have far less drama in our lives because of not having the stress of being in a romantic or sexual relationship. So now I want to shift the focus a bit to what is it like in our society when we expect and assume that everyone have compulsory sexuality, because this affects all of us. So asexuality and low libido are pathologized. I actually have a friend who is asexual who was prescribed excessive amounts of testosterone because his doctor believed that it wasn't right for him to not experience sexual attraction. So he actually ended up, unfortunately, developing a heart condition as a result. And sadly, that is not an uncommon experience. It muddies consent. We live in a culture where no doesn't always mean no. And when there's the assumption that everyone wants and desires sex, that certainly helps to uphold that assumption that everyone is always interested in sex and wanting it. It invalidates platonic relationships. We've often heard the phrase "just friends" as if it's not nearly as fulfilling or as valuable as romantic relationships. When platonic relationships can be extremely fulfilling and can be the foremost relationships in our lives if that's what we so choose. It reinforces gender stereotypes that men are very sexually focused and that women maybe less so. In fact, there are far more women who identify as asexual, and one of the theories behind that is that it's because asexual men are too afraid to come forward because of that gender expectation that they be highly sexual. It sexualizes social interactions. So, oftentimes we may hear or know of people who don't fraternize with the opposite sex or outside of their romantic sexual relationship with someone who could be considered a potential partner for them. So it really limits our social circle. And our educational systems treat sex as inevitable. In sex education, the assumption is that every person will eventually have sex instead of allowing for other orientations such as asexuality. There's a healthcare bias. As asexuals, we're often asked very invasive questions that are uncomfortable for us about our sexual experience. It narrows the construct of what it means to be an adult. This is very true for me. I have always felt very stunted, as if I am not a full adult in the eyes of society and sometimes even my family, because I'm without a partner. And it shows up in really odd ways at, for example, family gatherings of where I get to sit and who I sit by and things like that you may not expect. It increases the risk of coercive relationships when we assume that everyone desires sex. Unfortunately, a lot of asexuals experience sexual assault because of this assumption that, oh, if you just experience it, you're going to realize that it really is great and you're going to want to be a sexual being. And it influences economic systems. If you think about all of the industries we have that promote looking good and attractive for the opposite sex, such as the cosmetics industry, we begin to see that our whole economic system is greatly influenced by the expectation that we are all sexual beings. So I want to pause and invite some reflection questions. How has compulsory sexuality shown up in your life? And what might this awareness be inviting you to explore? So if anyone feels comfortable jumping in, I invite you to share your responses. Otherwise, we'll continue on.
This is an open invitation for any and all of you. So please raise your hands electronically if you're able, and if not, you can raise your hands physically, and Richard is watching for raised hands.
Yeah. No, I thank you for that presentation and the unusualness of it too, in terms of how seldom we have such a presentation in education systems or in life come across that. And I feel a great sense of relief about I don't know, the growing up process and the pressures that I and others, I think, experienced to become a somebody according to sexuality and gender. And it makes me think it makes me even wonder how many uh, how many of us get sort of almost like steered into something that we don't really know how to claim properly, because that side of things is not covered. And so it creates a kind of a bias in the whole field and a distortion in the whole field. So I really appreciate what you've shared there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's a great observation. And to be honest with you, in the queer community, we often talk about what a gift it is for us to have the experience of exploring our sexuality that often allosexuals don't have, because we are often just pushed into a certain box or a certain lane and aren't encouraged to explore. So yeah, I hear what you're saying and agree. It's unfortunate. We're meant to be fluid and unique human beings, and I would love to see us really encourage, especially our young people, to explore, and all people really, to explore who they might really be.
Mhm. Thank you. And I also wonder a question really. Do you think that we all have a territory within ourselves of not knowing, and that we almost need to reflect on, what that territory is that has never been addressed properly through um, asexual and aromantic uh, just realities, and the existence of so much pressure in our lives.
Yeah, I agree. That's a beautiful way to say it, the unexplored territory. I think, yes, I do think we all have that. Um, and I think, especially in terms of or romantic and sexual orientation, I think it's one of the least explored areas, even though our sexuality and romantic orientation is core to who we are spiritually as spiritual beings. So I think it's a real shame that we don't invite this kind of deep inner
Mm,
exploration.
mm. No, I think it is too. Thank you very much. And over to Tendeka.
Thank you so much, John. Let
Oh,
me call on Tandeka before you do that, because
oh,
she had her
sure.
hand up.
Yes, of course.
Tandeka.
Cindy, first off, thank you for your extraordinary vulnerability and honesty in sharing with us the process you have gone through to reach extraordinary clarity about yourself and the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
3 kinds of questions came to mind, and I asked them in a way that I hope that if none of them seem relevant to you, that you do not answer them, because I want to be deeply respectful of your process. First were the 3 Greek terms agape, eros, and philia. Friendship, sexual romance, and compassion. Second, I've never thought of the Buddha as asexual. And a number of spiritual leaders I've never put into sexual categories at all. Although my guess is that most of them I often think of probably do not engage in sexual relationships, but certainly have deep compassion and friendship. So finally, I wonder if there's another term that you might also use rather than asexual, since asexual in this way would be akin to me saying, well, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I haven't told you what I am. Or I'm not an atheist or a theist or a non-theist. I haven't told you what I am. So I wonder if you sometimes play with a broader category that has nothing to do with sexuality at all.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for your questions. Yeah, I will just say I experience people as energy. That is how I feel attraction to people. I personally don't experience gender really. I feel detached from gender. I experience aesthetic attraction to people of all genders. And that was part of what was hard for me to discern asexuality. There is some importance, though, in having the asexual label, in that it gave me something to hold on to. I hold on to it more loosely now than I did when I first came out. I just needed something to ground myself in, and that label gave it to me. So, in terms of what I would call myself a mix of masculine and feminine energy in a spiritual sense. But asexuality is how I relate to the world, if that makes sense. And I don't know if that answers your questions at all. That was
It
my
does.
interpretation
If
of
I
it.
have permission for a follow-up comment.
Sure.
When you said, well, the fundamental category for me is energy. And I thought, yes, that's it. And I've become hooked on the telepathy tapes in which people are being interviewed from all over the world about energy. So that was the aha moment that you gave me. Everything else is commentary. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those very insightful and wonderful questions. I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you so much, Tandeka, for those great questions. And Cindy, you may want to lead us on. And
all right, so let's continue on with how amatonormativity influences our culture. So it erodes community in non-romantic relationships. I've already alluded to that. Those of us who are single and not in romantic relationships are often kind of pushed to the corners or the edges of society. And there's a lot of mental health strain, as I alluded to in my own story. The expectation that I should date and marry weighed on me heavily. And I think it does on all of us, whether or not we're asexual or allosexual. So if we were just allowed to have relationships that fit us when, at the time of life they fit us, I think we'd all be better off. There's an inequitable distribution of resources and rights. Last I checked, which was about a year ago, there were over 1,100 laws in the United States that confer benefits on married people that those of us who are single do not receive. And a lot of those are financial based. So they have great impacts on our lives. And one of the things I'm very passionate about is trying to get equitable rights for those of us outside of marriage relationships. It strains romantic relationships because you probably have discerned or seen that when people are in a romantic relationship, their romantic partner is expected to fulfill all of their needs, whether it be emotional, as a parent, as financial support. It's just a lot to expect of one person. And if we had a better rounded culture in terms of how we relate to each other and who we welcome into our lives, I think we'd all be better off. It devalues care work that takes place outside of marriage. I have a very dear friend who I spend some holidays with. We travel together. We share everything. If she would ever need my care, if she got sick, I wouldn't be able to get off of work. There's just no structure around me providing care for someone who is not my marriage partner. So it's unfortunate, and it really keeps us, I think, strained in how we care for each other as a society and culture. It stigmatizes non-traditional life paths. Obviously, I felt shame when I knew I was aromantic and asexual. I knew right away that this was not something that anyone in society necessarily was going to cheer about when I came out. I did receive a lot of support from my family, fortunately, and my friends, but culturally, I knew it would not be something that would be accepted. There's limited family models for children. Children grow up thinking they have to have a romantic partner and live with that partner for the rest of their lives. That's the expectation. So it really limits how we can build love into our lives. Weakened social fabric, as I mentioned, single people are kind of pushed to the margins of society, and that's unfortunate because we all suffer because of that. And constrictive housing and urban design models. This may be something that doesn't come to your thought right away, but for example, I live with my brother. We have a primary bedroom with an ensuite bathroom. There's no consideration that two adults who are not in a romantic relationship might be living together, or that oftentimes multi-generational families live together. So it's just over and over we can see that we're reinforcing the expectation that everyone's going to be in or desire a romantic relationship. So these are my final reflection questions, and we can discuss these, and I invite more questions, just things to ponder. In what ways do compulsory sexuality and amatonormativity intersect with gender, religion, capitalism, or other social systems? And then what would a society look like if friendship and chosen family were given the same legitimacy as romantic partnerships? So we can pause and take those or any other questions you have. That's all I have. And I'll keep this slide up if folks want to answer either of these questions or ask any of their own.
Thank you so much, Cindy. This has been remarkable and evocative. Thank you. Bob Messley has his hand up.
So thank you very much. This was new territory for me, so appreciate that. I want to ask about your relationship with your daughter, and is your daughter allosexual, and how would you describe her sexuality? But how did you help her navigate life as she went through life and had to encounter these issues how did that work, and how did that go with the two of you, and how is she doing? So I guess that's my leading question. I have others, but that's my start.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to speak to my daughter's sexuality. That's her story, not mine. So
Okay.
I want to respect her privacy. But I will say, as a parent, that I certainly encouraged her to explore. And, I clearly role modeled a different way of building family and living my life. So she had that experience. And then she also, I encouraged her to explore, but also to trust herself. If she knew who she was, that was her truth, but also to hold it loosely, that she may, as she grows up, she may find that maybe who she thought she was isn't who she thought she, or who isn't actually who she is. So just really encouraged open conversation. I was very upfront with her when I was exploring my own sexuality. She knew when I thought I might be bisexual or a lesbian, and when I landed on asexuality and aromanticism. So I was very open and honest with her, and hopefully that encouraged her to do the same. But of course, for her generation, this is all kind of superfluous, I'll say, because she says that her friends don't come out. They just are who they are. So it's very different for kids now. And it's exciting for me to see that kids hopefully won't have to go through what I did and just really not have any visibility to who they could be or maybe.
That's an encouraging report, and I'm not completely surprised by that, but I know that that's not true of everyone in the society, but it's possible for students to, for young people to experience that. So I'm glad to hear that's happening. Okay, I have other thoughts and comments, but that's enough for now. Thank you very much.
Sure,
Thank you,
thanks
Bob.
for your question.
Say McDaniel.
All right. Hi, Cindy. Thank you so much.
Hi.
And I'm going to preface my question with a little biography. There was a time in my life when I almost thought that I wanted to be a monk, and more specifically, I was in the mold of Thomas Merton, and so I was drawn to the kind of that particular monastic option that he took. So I've always had an affinity for what you might call hermits. And now I am also a lay associate in a Benedictine community. I didn't become a monk, but I'm a lay associate with a woman's Benedictine community in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and happily so. And the women that I know there are tremendously creative and caring. I think that some of them have a sexual and romantic side to their psyche, and some may well be aromantic and asexual. But those models have wanted me to not simply make space for people that are aromantic or asexual, but to say that they have a special gift to the world. And so I would like to pose that in terms of process philosophy, about which you need know nothing, but here goes. In process philosophy, as influenced by Whitehead, he speaks of the kind of fundamental energy of the universe as eros. And so eros is not only something people feel, it's the very energy of the universe. Even the divine reality has eros. But there's no need to link eros with romance or sex. There's a lot of eros that is non-sexual, non-romantic, but nonetheless full of a desire for intensity of experience. And so that's how he would define eros, as feeling drawn toward intensity of experience. And that takes me back to Catholicism for a moment. They talk about two kinds of religious orders. One is called Cenobitic and the other Eremitic. And Eremitic are those who feel drawn toward solitude. They want to be hermits or hermitesses. And they're full of vitality. It's not that becoming a hermit eliminates vitality. It's just a different kind of vitality. As a matter of fact, it may be deeply drawn to nature, to the more than human world, in ways that others don't know. In that sense, it's a tremendous gift. And I think Merton was a bit like that. You know, some of his writings are deeply ecological. He loved the fields, he loved the animals, he loved the hills, he loved the rivers. The other kind is cenobitic, and that's the community-based monasticism, where you do live in community with others, and that's a great joy and benefit. But it's not sexual, it's not romantic. So I was wondering if there might be two kinds of spirituality embodied by, and help me with my terminology if I miss it, forgive me, it's all kind of new to me, embodied by people that are asexual and aromantic, but nonetheless obviously drawn toward a kind of spirituality. And there might be kind of the cenobitic style and the eremitic style, or the solitary style and the communal style. I think that's my question.
Yeah, yes, I agree with that. And again, I can only speak to my personal experience. Being asexual and aromantic is who I am at the soul level. And without that knowledge, I still had deep, rich experiences,
Yeah.
but since embodying these core parts of my identity, my life has just exploded. It's become beautiful, incredible. Things have manifested in ways I never could have dreamed. And I think it's because I embraced the gifts of being asexual and aromantic, which are this deep connection to energy, to love in all of its forms, to not have the constricted pressure to be one way in my body. I can be however I want in my body and in relationship to other people. When I thought I had to be dating and that was heterosexual, I could not have intimate relationships with men. It wasn't possible for me because I was thinking, oh, I need to be moving towards having a sexual or romantic relationship. Now that that expectation is not there for me, I have so many male friends, deep, deep relationships. And I think the way I experienced relationships is amazing. And the way people let me experience relationships is amazing because I'm not a threat to people, right? I can be a friend, I can have a deep relationship with anyone because they know it's not going to turn romantic or sexual. What a gift that is. But why can't we have that with everyone, regardless of how we identify? That's the sad thing, I think.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
But I do think that it seems to me that you are and can be and are transparent to that love energy. And that's a gift. And maybe others among us can partake of that gift.
I think so. I think it's an open invitation. I think that's what asexuality and aromanticism is. It's an invitation for everyone to really move into what it means to be a loving being outside of what society tells us love and attraction has to be. There are a million ways to be attracted to someone. Why do we just constrict it to one or two ways? And there's a deep spiritual component to that. What are we missing out of at the soul level when we constrict ourselves in that way? I certainly experienced that myself. I just could not. I had meaningful relationships, but the depth of my relationships now is infinitely more more elegant, I'll say, even because of just allowing love to be there in however it shows up instead of trying to frame it in one way or another.
And that affects, am I right? I think you said that also influences the way that you can feel in relation to the more than human world, to plants, to animals, to water, to air.
Absolutely. I feel intimate connections to nature, to plants and animals. Um, I love to touch moss, for example. I feel
Mm.
very deeply connected to moss. Certain trees, I'm a literal tree hugger. And I think it's because I've embraced who I am. And I know people don't understand the way I love. A lot of people don't understand the way I love, and I'm okay with that. I accept that. I love the way I love, and that's what's new for me.
I love that you touch moss.
Thank you.
The
Thank you
Catholic
so
in me wants to say that's your Eucharist.
Mm,
That's your
that's
Holy
beautiful.
Communion.
Thank you so much, Jay. We're nearing the end of our time. So, Cindy, I want to first say a huge thank you to you. You've been transparent and real. You've shown your deep, loving self, and you have stretched the boundaries of how we understand the world and relationships, uh, intimacy, possibility. Thank you for everything. And I'd like you to have the last word. So, what would you like to tell us as you conclude?
Well, first, I want to thank you all for being here. I never know what to expect when I talk on this topic or share my personal experience, but you all engaged very thoughtfully and compassionately, and I appreciate that. And thank you for your interest. Again, I never know if people are going to want to hear about asexuality and aromanticism. So I appreciate you even being here and spending time with me today. And thank you for your questions. I typically don't get such deep and thought-provoking questions when I speak on these topics. So thank you. You've given me a lot to think about too. So I'm going to take today and let it sit with me and percolate a bit more. So you've given me a lot of food for thought. And I just want to thank you, Mary Elizabeth, for the invitation. I love to speak on this topic, and I thank you for your graciousness in hosting me. And I also just want to say that my memoir will be out in June of 2026, if any of you are interested.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to all of you